You cannot protect your livelihood by sacrificing your inner alignment and expect peace in return. Provision may continue, stability may even increase, but tranquility does not survive long in a heart that consistently overrides its own values out of fear. Rarely do people look at a decision and say to themselves, I am choosing what is wrong. That language is too stark, too confronting. Instead, the mind reaches for softer explanations.
When the heart is tired and searching, when the soul is worn and still, every step feels slow and heavy, every day another hill. There is mercy in the journey, there is light beyond the hill. Rushed Institute, guiding hearts, building homes, elevating life.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back once again to Rushed Career. If you're listening to this and you consider yourself a good person, sincere in your faith, responsible in your work, and genuinely trying to do the right thing, I want you to stay here with me. This episode is not aimed at people who intentionally chose wrong. It is not about dramatic moral collapse, public scandal, or moments that they clearly cross a line. It is about something far quieter, far more common, and far more unsettling because it happens without announcing itself. It is about small compromises you barely noticed when they happened. The one that felt necessary at the time, the ones that came wrapped in responsibilities, pressures, or realism, the ones you told yourself were temporary, harmless, or unavoidable. Decisions that did not feel like betrayals, but like an adjustment, like survival, like something like maturity. Most people do not wake up one morning and decided to abandon their values. No, they drift slowly, sensibly, with reasons that make sense in the moment. They learn to explain things to themselves in ways that reduce friction. They learn how to quiet the inner voice that hesitates, not because they want to do wrong, but because life keeps asking them to keep going. You did not intend to change who you are. You intended to adapt to complex environment. You intended to be practical in a world that really makes spaces for conscience. And those intentions were not malicious. They were human. And yet, somewhere along the way, something subtle began to shift. You started feeling less settled with yourself, not overwhelmed with guilt, not paralyzed by shame, just uneasy, a quiet loss of clarity, a sense that something inside you no longer felt as aligned as it once did. You became less present with your own decisions, less anchored in your inner compass, even while everything on the outside looks fine. Islam is deeply attentive to this moment. Not a dramatic fall, but a gradual dulling of the heart. Not rebellion, but neglect. Not deviance, but distance. The Prophet, peace be upon him, warned not only about major sins, but about heart that slowly lose sensitivity. Because when the heart becomes accustomed to compromise, it does not always protest loudly, it grows quiet. So let me say this gently because gentleness is required here as usual. The most dangerous compromises are rarely loud, they are quiet. They are reasonable, they are often socially rewarded. They come with praise, relief, a sense of having navigated something successfully, and that is why they are easy to miss. You're not listening to these because you are corrupt or insincere. You are listening to this because you are honest enough to notice the discomfort instead of numbing it, because something in you still cares, because your conscience has not gone silent. Today is not about blame or self accusation. It is about awareness because integrity is rarely lost in a single moment. It is eroded through many small justified decisions. And what erodes slowly can also be restored slowly with awareness, humility, and return to alignment. This conversation is not here to shame you. It is here to help you come back to yourself before the distance grows any further. Modern professional life rarely asks you to abandon your values in a way that is obvious or dramatic. Instead, it invites you to soften them, to delay them until a more convenient moment, to reinterpret them so they fit the room you are in, to make them more practical, more flexible, more acceptable. Nothing is framed as outrightly wrong, it is framed as necessary. You're told to be adaptable, to read the room carefully, to choose your battles wisely, to be strategic rather than idealistic, to wait for the right time. And most of the time, this advice does not feel immoral. It feels sensible. It feels responsible. It feels like maturity. You tell yourself, this is what growth looks like in the real world. For Muslims navigating corporate systems, financial pressure, immigration concerns, family responsibility, and subtle form of discrimination, compromise often feels like the cost of entry. You learn quickly that standing firm can come with consequences, so you reassure yourself that you're being realistic, not weak. This is simply how the world works. The intention matters more than denial, that Allah knows your hurt, even if your action needs to bend for now. Islam does not deny complexity or hardship. It does not demand recklessness in the name of principle, but it is deeply attentive to the direction of the heart. The Quranic concern is not only about isolated actions, but about trajectories, not just what you do once under pressure, but what you become when pressure becomes normal. A heart that repeatedly explained itself away eventually stopped noticing what once disturbed it. The danger here is not that you made one difficult or morally ambiguous decision. Life demands those at times. The danger is that repeated justifications quietly reshapes your moral sensitivity. What once felt heavy becomes familiar. What once required prayer and hesitation becomes automatic. Not because you stopped caring, but because caring began to feel costly. If this reflection feels uncomfortably close, if it names something you have sensed but not fully articulated, let that discomfort be a sign of life, not failure. It is not because your iman is weak, it is because your consciousness is still alive. And a living conscience, even when unsettled, is a mercy. It is the heart's way of asking you for realignment before numbness sets in. This moment of awareness is not a threat, it's an invitation. Most people imagine integrity as something solid and dramatic, something you either possess or lose in a clear moment of failure. They imagine it breaking loudly with consequences that are obvious in public. But in real life, integrity rarely collapses all at once. It erodes quietly, almost invisibly, through a series of small, seemingly reasonable adjustments. One exception becomes a pattern. One silence becomes a habit. One uncomfortable decision becomes the new baseline from which future decisions are measured. Each step feels minor. Each choice feels justified by circumstance. Nothing feels like a betrayal. And that is precisely why the process goes unnoticed for so long. Psychology describes this process as moral disengagement, the gradual loosening of internal standard through rationalization. You explain to yourself why this situation is different, why this time does not count, why this principle can wait. Islam speaks to this dynamic through the language of the heart. When the heart repeatedly ignores its own signals, it is not hardened through rebellion or deviance. It hardens through neglect, through repeated movement where conscience speaks and is quietly overridden. This is why the Quran warns about hearts that become sealed not by sudden sin, but by persistent disregard. Sensitivity dulls. What once felt heavy begins to feel normal. The heart does not protest loudly anymore. It learns to adapt. Each compromise taken alone feels small enough to dismiss. Together, they create a direction, a trajectory that slowly carries you away from who you thought you were becoming. And because the movement is gradual, It feels less like living and more like drifting. You did not betray your values in one dramatic act. You postponed them. You told yourself there will be a better time, a safer moment, a more convenient context to return to them. And over time, as postponement became routine, those values began to feel distant, abstract, and harder to reach. This realization is not meant to condemn. It is meant to awaken, because what drift can only be redirected, and what was postponed can still be returned with awareness, humility, and intention. Now, pause here for a minute, because this is where many people defend themselves instead of listening. Rarely do people look at a decision and say to themselves, I am choosing what is wrong. That language is too stark, too confronting. Instead, the mind reaches for softer explanations. You tell yourself this is temporary. You reassure yourself that everyone does this, that this is simply how things work. You remind yourself that your intention is still good, that your heart is still in the right place. These statements feel calming. They lower internal tension. They allow you to move forward without sitting in discomfort. And that is precisely why they are powerful. Justification does not silence the conscience by force. It soothes. It trains it to step aside politely. Over time, what once unsettled you stopped registering, not because the action became right, but because your sensitivity to it has been dulled through repetition. Islam places immense importance on niyyah, intention, but it never detached intention from action. Intention was not given to us as a shield to protect questionable choices. It was meant to orient behavior, to keep the heart aligned as decisions are made. When intention is used to override conscience instead of guiding it, something subtle begins to thin. Integrity is not shattered, it is worn down. This is one of the quiet dangers of good intentions language. It can become a way of avoiding honest self reckoning. You begin trusting your stated intention more than your inner discomfort. You prioritize explanation over alignment. And slowly, the heart learns that it does not need to speak as clearly because it will be talked over anyway. What you repeatedly justify eventually feels normal. The unfamiliar becomes familiar. The heavy becomes light. The questionable becomes routine. And by the time you notice the shift, it does not feel like you crossed the line. It feels like the line moved. This is not because you stopped caring about right and wrong. It is because justification, when left unexamined, reshapes the moral landscape quietly. And integrity, once thinned, is not restored by louder intention, but by the listening again to the voice you learned to explain away. Now, before we talk about restoring integrity, we need to talk about fear. Many compromises are not born from desire or arrogance. They are born from fear, fear of losing income and destabilizing those who depend on you, fear of standing out in an environment where being different already feels costly, fear of being labeled difficult, uncooperative, or naive, fear of being quietly excluded from opportunity, growth, or belonging. These fears do not announce themselves loudly. They settle into the background and begin shaping decisions silently. Fear has a persuasive logic. It convinces you that silence is safer than honesty, that flexibility is wiser than clarity, that blending in is smarter than standing firm. It whispers that survival must come before principle, at least for now. And because these messages are framed as protection rather than compromise, they feel reasonable, even necessary. Islam does not shame fear. It recognizes it as part of the human condition. The Quran speaks to hearts that feel afraid, uncertain, and vulnerable. But Islam never appointed fear as a guide. Fear was never meant to be a moral compass. When fear begins to lead, values do not disappear, but they follow reluctantly, dragged behind decisions rather than guiding them. This is where the cost becomes internal. Each fear driven compromise may protect something external, a role, an income, a reputation, but it slowly erodes inner alignment. The heart begins to feel divided. You do what is required, but you do not feel all doing it. Peace becomes conditional, dependent on things continuing to work out. There is a hard truth here that deserves honesty. You cannot protect your livelihood by sacrificing your inner alignment and expect peace in return. Provision may continue, stability may even increase, but tranquility does not survive long in a heart that consistently overrides its own values out of fear. Islam calls us not to recklessness confrontation, but to courageous trust, to effort anchored in reliance, not fear disguised as wisdom. Fear acknowledged can be addressed. Fear obeyed becomes a ruler, and only one thing was ever meant to rule the heart. Now, let's talk about what returning looks like. Restoring integrity does not require dramatic conversion, public declarations, or radical career changes that uproot your life overnight. Integrity is rarely repaired through spectacle. It is restored quietly, through awareness, through noticing the moment when something inside you tightens, when your chest feels heavy, when your conscience speaks softly before your mind rushes in to explain it away. These sensations are not inconvenience, they are invitations. Islam teaches repentance not as punishment or humiliation, but as a return to clarity after confusion, a return to alignment after drift, a return to softness after the heart has been under pressure for too long. Tauba is not reserved for dramatic scenes. It is also for moments of neglect, of numbness, and gradual distancing. It is the heart's way of saying, I want to come back before I forget who I am. Exam excellence in professional life is often misunderstood as moral heroism or feasible righteousness. In reality, it is attentiveness. It is the willingness to pause before the next compromise and ask a quiet, honest question. Does this decision draw me closer to Allah, or does it move me further away from myself? It is choosing presence over autopilot, awareness over reflex. Integrity is not about never struggling. Struggle is part of navigating complex lives and demanding environments. Integrity is about remaining sensitive within the struggle. It is about refusing to become numb to the discomfort that signals misalignment. The moment struggle stops registering, the heart hardens. But when struggle is noticed, named, and held with sincerity, it becomes a pathway back to Allah. This is where restoration begins, not with perfection, but with attentiveness, not with guilt, but with honesty, and not with retreat from the world, but with a renewed way of moving through it. Begin by noticing the decisions you feel the need to justify, especially to yourself. Pay attention to the explanation that rise quickly in your mind, the reasons that calm your discomfort before you have fully felt it. Justification is often not a conclusion, but a signal. It points to a place where something inside you hesitated, even briefly. That hesitation is not weakness, it is awareness asking for attention. Ask yourself where you have chosen silence to avoid discomfort. Not silence born of wisdom or patience, but silence chosen out of fear, fatigue, or desire to keep things smooth. Then ask gently what our silence may have cost you. Inner clarity is fragile. When it is repeatedly traded for ease, the heart begins to feel divided. Naming this cost is not self accusation, it is honesty. Practice naming discomfort before you explain it away. When something feels off, pause long enough to acknowledge it. The heart often speaks before the mind reframes it. It speaks through unease, tightness, or quiet sense of misalignment. Allow that voice to be heard, even briefly, restores dignity to your inner moral compass. Re-anchor your decision making in remembrance. Salah and dua are not escapes from complexity or responsibility. They are a source of moral orientation. They return you to a place where outcomes are no longer the sole reference point and where alignment matters as much as effectiveness. When decisions are carried into prayer, they are no longer carried alone. Finally, choose one small act of integrity this week. Not a grand gesture, not a risky declaration, just one honest boundary, one moment of alignment, one decision made with presence rather than fear. Restoration rarely happens through dramatic change. It begins with small returns, repeated consistently, until integrity no longer feels like something you're recovering, but something you're living again. This is how hurt come back quietly, gradually, with sincerity. O Allah, protect our hearts from becoming numb through repeated compromise. Restore our sensitivity where it has dulled and our courage where it is weakened. Grant us integrity that is gentle but firm, wisdom that is honest, and strength to choose what draws us closer to you. Do not let our need to survive cost us our inner clarity. Make our walk a place of sincerity, not erosion. Amin, Ya Rabbal Alameen. You were not changed by one wrong decision, and you will not be restored by one perfect one. The shift that altered you did not happen overnight. They unfolded slowly through repetition, pressure, and accommodation. And in the same way, restoration will not arrive through a single dramatic correction. It will come through small, consistent returns, through awareness practiced again and again, through choices that may feel quiet on the outside but are meaningful on the inside. Integrity was never meant to be a performance or flawlessness. It was always about being awake, awake to what you're feeling, awake to what you're choosing, and awake to the direction your heart is moving. Even when life is complex and decisions are imperfect, staying awake in demanding environment is not easy, and the effort itself carries reward. If you feel uncomfortable after listening to this, do not rush to silence that feeling. Discomfort here is not failure, it is evidence that your conscience is still alive, still responsive, still capable of guiding you back. A hardened heart does not feel this tension, a living one does. So pause before the next compromise, not to panic, but to breathe. Listen before you justify, not to curse yourself, not to accuse yourself, but to hear what your heart is trying to say. Return before you harden, not because you have fallen too far, but because you do not want distance to become normal. Your career can grow without your soul shrinking. You are allowed to succeed without losing yourself. And every time you choose alignment over numbness, you're already moving in the direction of restoration. So walk forward gently with sincerity. The return does not require urgency, it requires presence. Until next time, stay sincere, stay alert, and remember that who you are becoming matters more than what you are preserving. May Allah make it easy. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Guiding